Cleopatra. Say her name out loud and notice what comes to mind. Beauty, seduction, luxury, gold, dangerous love affairs with powerful Roman men. Maybe you picture dramatic eyeliner, towering columns, and a queen who conquered with charm instead of armies. For more than 2,000 years, that image has dominated movies, novels, paintings, and pop culture. Cleopatra as the ultimate femme fatale, the irresistible queen who brought mighty Rome to its knees with nothing but her voice and her eyes. But what if that version of Cleopatra is only a surface story? What if the real woman behind the legend was not just magnetic but methodical, not just captivating but calculating, not just a romantic figure, but one of the most politically intelligent rulers of the ancient world? To understand Cleopatra, we have to step away from the Hollywood lighting and step into a world of collapsing empires, fragile alliances, propaganda wars, assassinations, naval battles, economic strategy, and survival at any cost. Because Cleopatra didn't live in a romantic epic. She lived in one of the most volatile political moments in human history. And she didn't just survive in it, she played it at the highest level. Cleopatra VII was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a royal house that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. But here's the first twist most people overlook. Cleopatra was not ethnically Egyptian. Her family descended from Macedonian Greek generals who carved up Alexander the Great's empire after his death. The Ptolemies spoke Greek. They governed in Greek. They married within their own family to preserve bloodlines. For generations, they kept a cultural distance from the people they ruled. Egypt was their kingdom, but it wasn't their heritage. Cleopatra broke that pattern. She was the first of her line known to learn the Egyptian language. Not just ceremonial phrases, she reportedly spoke it fluently. She also learned several other languages, possibly as many as 7 or 8, allowing her to communicate directly with diplomats and foreign envoys without translators. In a world where translation meant delay and distortion, that skill was power. She understood something her ancestors often ignored. Ruling Egypt required more than wearing a crown. It required legitimacy. So she embraced Egyptian religious identity. She associated herself with Isis, one of the most powerful and beloved goddesses in Egyptian belief. This wasn't mystical delusion. It was political brilliance. By presenting herself as a living embodiment of Isis, she positioned herself not as a foreign ruler, but as a divine protector of Egypt itself. And she needed every ounce of that legitimacy. Because when her father died, Cleopatra did not inherit a stable throne. She inherited a powder keg. As tradition required, she was supposed to co-rule with her younger brother. In the Ptolemaic dynasty, siblings often married and ruled together. It was meant to keep power concentrated. In reality, it bred paranoia and rivalry. Cleopatra was around 18 when she became queen. Her brother was a child. That meant advisors and court officials held enormous influence, and those officials quickly realized something dangerous. Cleopatra was strong-willed, independent, and not easily controlled. Within a few years, she was pushed out, stripped of power, forced into exile. For many rulers, that would have been the end. But exile didn't mean defeat to Cleopatra. It meant recalculation. Instead of fading into obscurity, she began building alliances, gathering supporters, raising forces. She waited, and then Rome walked into the picture. At that moment, Rome wasn't just a powerful neighbor. It was the dominant superpower of the Mediterranean world. Its armies were unmatched. Its political influence stretched across continents, and its internal conflicts could decide the fate of entire kingdoms. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt pursuing his rival Pompey, Cleopatra recognized the opportunity instantly. Egypt's throne was tied to Roman approval whether Egyptians liked it or not. If she could secure Caesar's backing, she could secure her crown. The famous story says she had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters wrapped in a carpet or bedding sack. Whether the exact details are accurate or dramatized, the symbolism matters. It was bold, risky, theatrical. But it wasn't romantic fantasy. It was strategic timing. Cleopatra needed access. She needed to bypass hostile court officials. She needed a moment alone with the most powerful man in the Roman world. And she got it. What followed was not just an affair, it was an alliance. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra defeated her brother's faction and reclaimed the throne. Civil war in Egypt ended with her restored as queen. Rome gained a stable ally. Cleopatra gained protection from internal rivals. Was there attraction between them? Possibly. They had a son together, Caesarion, but reducing their partnership to seduction misses the larger picture. Cleopatra aligned herself with Rome's strongest political force because survival required it. And survival was always the priority. When Caesar was assassinated in Rome, the political landscape shattered. Suddenly, Cleopatra's most powerful ally was gone. Rome plunged into chaos again. New leaders emerged. New factions formed. And once more, Cleopatra adapted. Mark Antony, one of Rome's most influential military commanders, rose as a central figure in the power struggle. He controlled Rome's eastern territories, including areas near Egypt. That made him crucial. Cleopatra met Antony not as a passive figure, but as a ruler negotiating from a position of wealth and resources. Egypt was rich in grain, gold, trade routes. Rome depended heavily on Egyptian grain supplies. Cleopatra understood leverage. Their alliance became both political and personal. They had children together. They coordinated military strategies. They presented themselves in ceremonies as divine counterparts, Isis and Dionysus, reinforcing authority across cultures. But in Rome, this partnership looked threatening. Because while Antony was aligning himself with Egypt, another man was consolidating power in the West, Octavian. Young, calculating, relentless. He would later become Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Octavian needed something powerful to rally Roman opinion against Antony, and Cleopatra was perfect for that role. He launched a propaganda campaign that would echo for centuries. Cleopatra became the foreign temptress, the manipulative Eastern queen corrupting a noble Roman general, the dangerous outsider plotting against Roman values. It was politically brilliant. By framing the conflict not as a Roman civil war, but as a defense against a foreign queen, Octavian united Rome behind him. And this is crucial. Most of the surviving accounts about Cleopatra come from Roman historians writing after Octavian's victory. That means much of what history remembers was filtered through the lens of her enemy. Propaganda doesn't just win wars, it shapes memory. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Actium, a massive naval engagement. Antony and Cleopatra's forces were defeated. Whether due to tactical errors, internal miscommunication, or Octavian's superior strategy, the result was decisive. They retreated to Egypt, but Octavian followed. Defeat was closing in. Antony, believing Cleopatra dead after a misunderstanding, took his own life. When Cleopatra realized capture was inevitable, she faced a choice. In Rome, victorious generals paraded defeated rulers through the streets in chains. They were displayed as trophies, humiliated publicly, executed after serving their symbolic purpose. Cleopatra refused that fate. The legend will probably always include gold, eyeliner, and whispered seduction. But behind that legend stands a far more compelling figure, a multilingual monarch, a calculating diplomat, a religious icon, a naval commander, and a political mind sharp enough to challenge the most powerful empire of her time. Cleopatra's story isn't smaller than the myth, it's bigger. Not because she bewitched Rome, but because she forced Rome to take her seriously. The traditional story says she ended her life with the bite of an asp, a venomous snake. Historians debate whether that method is accurate. It may have been poison. It may have been carefully orchestrated symbolism. The snake, associated with Egyptian royalty, made for powerful imagery. What matters most is this: she chose her ending. She denied Octavian the spectacle. She denied Rome the image of her in chains. Even in defeat, she controlled what she could control: her narrative, her dignity, her final act. After her death, Egypt was absorbed fully into the Roman Empire. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended. The age of pharaohs was over. Rome stood unchallenged in the Mediterranean. And Cleopatra became a story told by the victors. But if we strip away centuries of romantic exaggeration and political distortion, what remains is not a caricature, but a formidable leader. She ruled for over 20 years in one of the most unstable eras of the ancient world. She maintained Egypt's economic strength under immense pressure. She navigated alliances with two of Rome's most powerful men, not as a victim, but as a strategist. She understood optics. She understood religion as political theater. She understood language as diplomacy. She understood that power in her era wasn't just military, it was narrative. And she played that game skillfully. The question then is why history so often reduces her to beauty and romance. Part of the answer lies in discomfort. A woman who wielded political power, commanded fleets, negotiated with generals, and positioned herself as divine authority disrupts traditional power structures. It's easier and safer to recast her as a seductress than to acknowledge her as a rival to Rome's greatest figures. Another part lies in the dominance of Roman records. When the winning empire writes the textbooks, nuance rarely survives. Cleopatra's intelligence threatened Rome's self-image, so her legacy was reshaped into something less threatening. Over centuries, artists amplified the drama, writers amplified the passion, filmmakers amplified the spectacle, each retelling layered fiction over fact until the myth felt more solid than the woman herself. But historians today increasingly re-examine her reign through archaeology, economic records, and cross-cultural sources. And what emerges is far more complex than the stereotype. Cleopatra invested in infrastructure. She managed trade networks that connected Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. She stabilized currency. She positioned Egypt as a critical supplier of grain during Roman instability. These aren't the actions of a reckless romantic. They're the actions of a ruler thinking long-term. She also understood symbolism better than most leaders of her era. Appearing in public ceremonies as Isis wasn't vanity. It sent a message to Egyptians that their queen was not a distant foreigner, but a divine protector tied to ancient tradition. It also communicated to foreign powers that Egypt's ruler possessed sacred authority. In diplomacy, perception is power. Cleopatra mastered perception. Even her relationships with Caesar and Antony can be reframed not as surrender, but as calculated engagement. In a world dominated by Rome, isolation would have meant conquest. Alignment offered breathing room. Did she gamble? Absolutely. Aligning with Antony against Octavian was a high-stakes decision, but every choice available to her carried risk. Remaining neutral was not an option. She wasn't operating from luxury. She was operating from necessity. When we look at her life this way, the story shifts. It becomes less about seduction and more about survival inside imperial gravity, less about romance and more about statecraft. Cleopatra didn't conquer Rome. She couldn't. No single kingdom could. But she forced Rome to treat Egypt not as a footnote, but as a central player in its power struggle. That alone speaks volumes. And perhaps the most fascinating element of her story is how effectively Octavian's propaganda endured. For 2 millennia, the image of Cleopatra as dangerous temptress overshadowed her role as capable monarch. That's not accidental. That's the long shadow of empire. Today, as historians re-examine ancient narratives, Cleopatra stands not as a cautionary tale of female manipulation, but as an example of political intelligence in a male-dominated world. She operated in a system designed to marginalize her. She negotiated with men commanding legions. She held her throne in a dynasty notorious for betrayal. She maintained Egypt's relevance until the final collapse. She didn't fail because she was weak. She fell because she faced a rising empire unified under a leader determined to erase rivals completely. History often frames her death as tragedy, but there's another way to see it. She chose autonomy in a world closing around her. She denied her enemy the final spectacle. She preserved, in the only way left available, her sovereignty. Cleopatra's true story isn't one of romance overpowering reason. It's one of intelligence confronting empire. It's one of adaptation in chaos. It's one of narrative warfare as real as any battlefield. And maybe the most powerful lesson isn't about ancient Egypt at all. It's about how history remembers women who challenge power. It's about who controls the pen after the war is over. It's about how easily a strategist can be reduced to a stereotype when the alternative threatens established myths. Cleopatra was not simply the last queen of Egypt. She was the final ruler of an ancient order standing at the edge of Roman domination. She understood the scale of what she was up against. She fought with the tools she had: language, diplomacy, wealth, symbolism, alliance. And for over 2 decades, that was enough.